Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. Clive Waring sat down at his piano one spring morning, 1985, just as he always did. His fingers touched the keys, filling the room with an exquisite melody. The rhythm of the music was his greatest passion. He was a respected musician in London, a composer working for the BBC, and a choir conductor. For him, notes were stronger than words, because music was the purest form of emotion. However, that morning, there was something strange. Accompanying the melody, a bizarre pressure reverberating in his head. At first, he felt a mild throbbing, but he didn't think much of it. He had been feeling a bit weak for a few days. It's probably just fatigue, he thought. But as the hours passed, the headache became unbearable. As he pressed the piano keys, his vision blurred for a moment. It was as though the notes were becoming blurry, and the world was fading behind a fog. When his wife Deborah noticed the paleness on Clive's face, she rushed to his side in concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. Clive placed his hand on his forehead. "I feel strange, like my brain is boiling," he said, his voice trembling. By noon, the tremors began. His speech was interrupted, and he struggled to finish his sentences. Suddenly, his gaze drifted off, as if he had forgotten where he was. In a panic, Deborah decided to take him to the hospital. In a hospital room in London, doctors anxiously assessed Clive's condition. Tests and brain scans revealed a disturbing result: herpes encephalitis. This deadly brain infection was rare, but once it took hold, it could cause irreversible damage. The virus attacked Clive's brain, especially, destroying the hippocampus, the center of memory. Deborah's breath caught when she heard the doctor's words. "Can you treat this?" she asked desperately. The doctor took a deep breath before revealing the bitter truth. "We can keep him alive, but the damage to his brain might be irreversible. He could lose his memory entirely." Those words struck Deborah's heart like a knife. She thought about Clive's love for music, the memories they had shared. Could everything disappear? Would he still remember the love in her eyes? Meanwhile, everything in Clive's mind was falling apart. As he writhed in fever, his sense of time completely distorted. Each time he woke up, he didn't remember where he was. Memories in his brain were fading, one by one, swallowed by time. One night, lying in a hospital bed, staring blankly at the white ceiling, a deep sense of fear crept over him. He knew something was missing, but he couldn't remember what. It was as if his mind kept rewinding like a lost cassette. Everything was growing darker, and he felt as if he was getting lost in a storm. And then, time stopped for Clive Waring. Clive Waring opened his eyes. A white ceiling, cold lights, the faint scent of disinfectant in the hospital room. He looked around with empty eyes. He didn't know how he had gotten there. His head spun. He raised his hand to touch his face. Even his own skin felt unfamiliar. As he looked around, he locked eyes with the nurse standing by the door. The woman smiled at him. "Good morning, Clive, how are you feeling?" Clive furrowed his brow. "I just woke up." He flinched at the sound of his own voice. When had he fallen asleep, or what had happened before that? The nurse gently sat next to his bed. "You're doing well. You're in the hospital, right now, receiving treatment." Clive took a deep breath and nodded. Then his gaze drifted to the other corner of the room. There was a notebook. He quickly flipped through the pages, which contained sentences written in his own handwriting. "Just woke up. This is the first time I'm conscious. Now, I'm really awake. I've never been awake before." The sentences were repeating. A whole page filled with the same words, all saying the same thing. Clive's hand began to tremble. Who had written these notes? And why were they all saying the same thing? How long had he been here? But he couldn't answer any of these questions, because his memory was being erased every few seconds, like waves hitting the shore. A few minutes later, the door opened and Deborah entered. Clive looked at her, and suddenly his eyes lit up. It was as if he were seeing someone he hadn't seen in years, reaching out to her with love. "Deborah," he called out, filled with great joy. "It's so nice to see you." The woman smiled, but her eyes were filled with tears. She hugged him tightly. Clive still recognized her. But then, only 30 seconds passed. Clive suddenly turned his head. His eyes wandered around aimlessly. Then he looked at her again. And once more, he excitedly called out, as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Deborah, when did you arrive?" Deborah swallowed. She had lived this scene countless times. Every time Clive saw her, he would rejoice as if he had never seen her before. But within seconds, that moment would vanish, and the cycle would start over. Deborah took his hand. Looking into his eyes, she began to tell him who she was. Clive couldn't remember the past, but instinctively he still felt a deep connection to the woman he loved. However, no matter how much she explained, every new second reset the past for him. Clive Waring was lost in a forgotten time that was constantly being erased. Deborah Waring walked slowly down the hospital corridor. Her hands were tightly clasped together, and her heart was pounding as if it would burst. When she reached the door, she paused for a moment, she took a deep breath. Every day, she went through the same thing, trapped in the same cycle with each visit. But it never became easier for her. But she entered the room. Clive was sitting on the bed. His eyes were fixed on nothing, as if he wasn't even aware of the world around him. But the moment he heard the door open, his face lit up. When his eyes landed on Deborah, it was as if he had missed her for years. He jumped up with excitement, as if he hadn't seen her in so long. "Deborah," he shouted, his eyes shining with happiness. It was as if he hadn't seen her for years, as if he had been far away from her. He pulled her into his arms and hugged her tightly. "How long has it been since we saw each other? I missed you so much." Deborah closed her eyes, and for a moment, time stood still. There was still the man who loved her, and still recognized her in her arms. But hidden within that happiness was a painful truth. Because a few seconds later, Clive's body tensed for a moment, his gaze lost, his arms relaxed. In that moment, he forgot who Deborah was. His eyes roamed the room again, and as if he were seeing her for the first time, he called out with excitement, "Deborah, when did you arrive?" Deborah held back her tears and smiled. "I just arrived, my love." Clive embraced her with the same excitement once again, and within a few seconds, that moment was gone. This cycle was repeating infinitely. Every time, Clive rediscovered her. Every time he would be thrilled as if he were seeing her for the first time. But for Deborah, it was losing the man she loved. Again, every day, the doctors had explained the situation to her from the very beginning. Clive's memory was erasing itself in a few second cycles. His memories were disappearing. Before they could be recorded, one of the doctors had simply described the situation like this: "Clive's memory is no longer even as long as a goal." These words shattered Deborah's heart. All the moments they had shared over the years, the places they had visited, the times they had laughed and talked, all of it had vanished from Clive's mind. When she told him about their marriage, Clive would look at her in surprise. "Are we married?" he would ask every time, with the same curiosity and astonishment. For him, the past didn't exist. The future, on the other hand, seemed even more impossible, because he didn't even know what to expect. He could only exist in the present moment. But there was something miraculous. Even though Clive forgot who Deborah was, he never forgot what he felt when he saw her. He couldn't remember her name, but when he saw her face, his eyes would fill with tears and his heart would fill with love. Every time he saw her, he would fall in love with her again. Scientists couldn't explain this. The memory center in Clive's brain was gone, but his emotions were still intact. His memory had vanished, but love had not. For Deborah, this small miracle was the only thing that kept hope alive despite everything. Clive, woke up every morning to the same blankness. Everything around him in the bedroom felt unfamiliar. He had forgotten where he was, when it was, and even who he was. Everything had been erased. Everything. But one thing, just one thing, still remained. Music. One morning, in the hospital room, as he sat on the bed with his arms wrapped around himself, a nurse approached him and asked, "Clive, would you like to go to the piano?" He paused for a few seconds to answer. Did he remember the piano? He couldn't even recall if there had been a piano there before. But there was something, a strange impulse within him. A thought crossed his mind that he might have played the piano for hours. The previous day, his hands slowly placed themselves on the edge of the bed, and then, as if unconsciously, he suddenly jumped up, crossed the room, and walked toward the corner where the piano stood. Without a word, he placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes that played briefly illuminated his world. His fingers had memorized the keys. Even though his mind didn't remember, his hands were moving with the subconscious memory in his brain. Each note, each chord, brought back a past that seemed to have vanished. Pieces of the past, lost memories, briefly, returned. There was a lost world inside him, but at that moment, he found himself. Each melody he played reminded him of the songs he loved, the memories, and the most precious moments in his past. This was a contradiction. His mind had forgotten the life he lived, but music was still alive within him. As he lost himself between the piano keys, Deborah entered the room. Her eyes saw Clive's fingers flowing smoothly over the keys. She smiled. This was a miracle for her. Clive didn't remember her, but his bond with music was still keeping him alive. "Clive," Deborah said, gently approaching him. "Do you remember this? It's one of your favorite songs. Clive paused for a few seconds, his fingers slowing down slightly. His eyes followed the piano. And then, although he couldn't fully respond, something seemed to stir inside him. A brief moment of awareness, a trace from the past. Scientists made a discovery while studying Clive's brain scans. Music had been recorded in a different part of Clive's brain. It didn't exist in his conscious memory, but his memory related to music was still strong. His relationship with music, like a trace in his subconscious, had not been erased even though it had disappeared. As Clive played the piano, the fragmented memories of the past, though lost every few seconds, came together to leave remnants of his past. Music was the only thing that hadn't vanished from his world. Every moment when he couldn't find his identity, Music reminded him who he was. Deborah realized how deep of a connection Clive had with music. Every chord he played reminded him of the life he had lived. That's why the time Clive spent at the piano each day became a beacon of hope for Deborah. Rediscovering Clive was, in a way, possible. But this discovery only happened through the existence of music. Everything in Clive's mind had been erased, but the memory of music remained deep within his soul, unbroken. It allowed him to start again every day, to love again every day. Music was always his strongest bond, his most passionate memory. And perhaps, music was the closest path to reclaiming the lost parts of his identity. Clive could no longer live his old life. He no longer lived in that familiar house, but in a smaller, more confined world. He had been placed in a special care facility. It was an environment arranged to meet his daily needs, but in a world full of forgotten and lost memories, everything still felt foreign to him. One day, Clive was sitting alone in his care room. Deborah entered, as always. Her eyes held patience and love, but today, there was something else in her eyes, an uncertainty and pain. Approaching him, she placed her hand over Clive. "Do you remember me, Clive?" Clive paused for a few seconds. His eyes studied her carefully, but the uncertainty remained. Slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said, his voice slow and deep. "But I know I love you." This simple yet profound answer left a mark on Deborah's heart. The most significant moments from Clive's past had disappeared from his memory. Yet, something hadn't been erased. Love. Emotions held a power beyond memory. For him, love continued, even if it wasn't remembered. Deborah smiled, a few tears streaming down her face. Clive may not have recognized her, but the love inside him was still there. This was a truth beyond memory and time. This moment is the essence of their tragic yet poignant story. Even when a person's memory is wiped clean, emotions can remain, and love is the strongest thing that can endure when identity is lost. Clive fell in love with Deborah again every day, as if each moment was the first dot, and Deborah, every day, felt the same emotions for him. Even in this pain, believing in the power of love, she kept starting again each day. Clive had lost his memories, but love never disappeared. Today, Clive Waring is still one of the most complex and fascinating cases of memory loss in the scientific world. Brain scientists, neurologists, and psychologists have been working for years to study his condition. Clive's story shows how our brains work, how fragile memory can be, and how deep its traces can be. It also raises many questions about identity and consciousness. Clive remembers nothing of his past. Every new day begins independently from the previous one. Time for him is not something to look back at. The end of one moment is the beginning of the next. Every morning, he wakes up with the same confusion, and everything around him seems new. He forgets who Deborah is, but her eyes still carry the same warmth. Every time, he embraces her as if falling in love for the first time. Every day he meets her again. Time stands still, creating an infinite now in Clive's world. Now is everything. Life in the moment is the only reality for him. The future is a distant dream, and the past is like traces from another planet. Lost, but now, it is the place where everything has been lost and rediscovered. For many people, this might seem like a punishment, but Clive never loses the moment he's living in. Each moment, like a person reborn, he lives everything fresh and unique. Even without memories, the power of his emotions and his connection to music guide him. Music has become a lifeline for Clive. Every time he sits at the piano, those melodies and chords offer him a new world, filling the space left by his erased memories. The notes he plays are like fleeting echoes of lost memories. Every touch of the keys seems to remind him of a piece of his identity. And music gives his life meaning once again, every day. For Deborah, this is a beacon of hope. Clive's bond with music reminds her that she hasn't lost the man she loves. In a world where the past has been erased, only music and love remain. Clive's memory flows like a river, never stopping, with nothing to return to. But behind this lost past lies the fragility and strength of the human soul. Memory loss may have left Clive without an identity, but his emotional and human connections are still intact. In his world, identity and memory are stories. Stories that exist not only with the past, but with the present as well. Clive doesn't remember the past. Time may have stopped for him, but his love, his music, and his inner human emotions have never been erased. Today, he still falls in love with the woman he loves, still plays the piano, and every moment is worth rediscovering. Clive's story shows how fragile memory is and how a person's identity is formed not only by the memories they have, but by the emotional connections they maintain. As his world becomes an endless now. Perhaps this is the most powerful expression of a life beyond memory and time.